Past several days and the past several weeks. I want to thank you for joining us as we have this conversation tonight on this conversation. And if we're honest, we do not have to condone the violence in order to understand it. We do not have to agree with lawlessness and violence to recognize its source in our communities. All Marylanders and all Americans want to live, work, learn, grow, and raise their families in safe communities. Would you agree with that? And so this desire, it transcends race, it transcends class, creed, color, job title, and religious affiliation. It's our birthright. And for this reason, our nation's framers penned words indelibly imprinted upon democracy itself. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, and today if we were writing, we would say, and women, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I want to welcome you to tonight's conversation. I'm really looking forward to get into tonight's conversation. I'm honored to have with us tonight to bring greetings the state's attorney for Prince George's County, Angela Alsobrooks. She's going to come at this time to bring greetings. Let's welcome her as she comes.
Good evening, everybody. It is so wonderful to be here tonight. I first want to thank Pastor Coates and thank Mount Eden Baptist Church for this wonderful opportunity. I tell you, Pastor Coates has been a wonderful leader. This is not our first time here tonight, but instead he's on the front edge of issues of concern to this community. And I want to say thank you, Pastor Coates, for your leadership. This is an important conversation that we're having here tonight because the relationship between public safety, the state's attorney, the police, the sheriffs in this community is a sacred relationship. When you have the authority to take life and to take a person's liberty, well, that relationship, the trust between our community and public safety is an absolutely sacred relationship. And so having conversations about how to strengthen that relationship is critical to the health of this community. But really what I want to say tonight, I know that you have panelists here and you're going to delve into the issues that we've seen in our state and across the country. But the good news in Prince George's County is that the relationships we've seen even here are not what they used to be. I was born in Prince George's County in 1971. I have lived here continuously, and many of you in this room, especially those who have been around for a while, remember what it used to be like. I just can mention a name like Terrence Johnson to remind us of the pain that we have experienced in so many situations in this county. But what I'm happy to say tonight is that Prince George's County and our relationship is not what it used to be. In fact, I am very proud and I believe that Prince George's County in so many regards really ought to be a model for how this is done across the country. You probably have noticed even as of late, when we've had to hold officers accountable, I bet you haven't seen me ever standing without the chief of police standing next to me. We believe that this is critical because you know what? We never guarantee that that mistakes won't happen, but when they do, transparency is the way that we respond. We respond by holding folks accountable, but we have to do so by coming before you and saying, you know what, we didn't do it right this time, but we're working hard to retain the trust of this community because we can't keep you safe unless we do. I agree with Pastor Coates that it is our desire to make sure America is as good as it's promised. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, we do that through this relationship. So thank you all for being here tonight, for taking time out of your evening. I want to say thank you to all the panelists who hold us accountable. Again, like I say, it's a sacred relationship, and we just want to thank you for standing in there with us. I believe, and I'll say this and sit down, that the relationship we have had in this community has allowed us over the last 4 years to cut homicides by 40%. We have likewise, over the last 4 years, cut violent crime by 37%. It doesn't happen just because of us. It happens because we have come together to decide how we will keep our citizens safe. So thank you. May God continue to bless all of you. Enjoy the discussion tonight, and the best is yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Let's give it up again for our state's attorney, Prince George's County. Thank you so much for being here tonight. She has another engagement, but I'm thankful that she stopped by tonight. Look, let's get right into tonight's conversation. As you came in, you received a note card. Those note cards are available for you to write down your questions. If you have questions, there will be an opportunity for you to come to the microphone and to ask questions at the appropriate time. And for those of you who are watching online, who are watching live, we are using hashtags #PoundJusticeMatters and #MEBC Town Hall for tonight's conversation. You can use those hashtags to ask your questions as well. You can invite others around the area to join into the conversation via the live stream that we have tonight. Look, I want to get right into the conversation and introduce our panelists tonight. We have Vince Canales, who is the president of the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police, with us tonight. Attorney J. Wendell Gordon of the Law Office of J. Wendell Gordon. We have with us as well Reverend Marlon Herring, with us tonight with the Institute for Homeland Security and Workforce Development. We also have Sarah Love, the Public Policy Director at the ACLU of Maryland. We also have with us Carlos Acosta, who is the Inspector General for the Prince George's County Police Department. We're glad to have him with us tonight. Senator Victor Ramirez. Senator Ramirez, if you would raise your hand as well. He represents District 47, Prince George's County in the Maryland State General Assembly. And last but certainly not least, Reverend S. Todd Yeary, the senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church, Baltimore, Maryland. Would you put your hands together for our panelists who are coming here today? Look, I want to get right into the conversation I know we're going to have, and I want us to have a robust conversation, yet a respectful conversation as well. I want to get right into the conversation. We've seen all of the images over the past several weeks and months, whether it's been Ferguson, Staten Island, New York, North Charleston, and more recently, Baltimore City. We've seen the images. We've been inundated by the stories. It has sparked so many passions all around the country, and I dare say around the world. And so I just want to start off with just some free-flow conversation before we get into some of the technicalities of how we might improve relations and address some of these concerns. When you think about the conversation today that's taking place across the state of Maryland, in particular, when you think about what the conversation that's taking place all around the world, would you just, each of you, just kind of give us a 90-second or 2-minute kind of opening statement about what are some of the, how do you feel about this issue? What are some of your concerns when we think about addressing concerns around public safety, police accountability around this issue? I'm going to start. I can't think of a better person to start with than Vince Canales, the president of the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police. Vince, let's get started.
Look, I'm going to stand up because I feel like I'm ignoring some of you on this side, so just bear with me for a minute here. Again, Vince Canales, I'm president of Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police, and I am a resident of Prince George's County. I live here. This is my home. My kids went to school here. I worked here as a Prince George's County police officer for 21 years and had a great career, retired about a year and a half ago, and I love serving this community. What I'd like to take as an opportunity just to give you a little bit of a different perspective. I'm sure the rest of the panel will address some of the constituency issues. I have a particular constituency, and that's all these police officers throughout the state of Maryland, about 22,000. This issue and the issues that are going on around the country affect us all. This is not about, it's not an us against anyone. This is about all of us. We have to come up with some creative solutions. We have to figure out a way to make the process work better, and we have to work collaboratively to get things done. I met Pastor Coates actually during the last legislative session, and we had an opportunity to sit for almost, I think, about an hour, just kind of talking about all the issues that were going to be occurring during the session. One of the promises I made to him, which is why I was glad he invited me here today, was it's not his job to basically stand up here and try to make you understand why officers do certain things or what our role is within the community and how we work with the community to get things done. Let me do it. It's my job. Let me come out and let me speak to you and let me answer your questions. I'm excited about being here. I'm looking forward to some of the questions. I'm hoping, I know we're going to have a good conversation here, and at the end of the day, it doesn't stop today. This is something that'll keep moving forward, and we'll get there. But, you know, I just want to sit and tell you that on behalf of the 22,000 officers in the state of Maryland, we're partners. You know, we talk about policemen as if they're not people. The reality is they're your neighbors, they attend your churches, their kids go to your schools. So I'm just asking that in the course of the conversation that we don't forget that. These men and women do a great job, and in Prince George's County, my department, I have nothing but the utmost respect and pride in what they've done over the years, and I commend them for the efforts that they have taken, that we have taken over the years to get to this point, be able to have this kind of conversation and this kind of working relationship that we do with the community. So I'm excited about being here. I look forward to talking a little bit further, and I'm not ignoring you when I'm sitting here doing the rest of the conversation.
Great, thank you, thank you. J. Wendell Gordon, what concerns you about this whole issue of police accountability, the concerns in the community across the state of Maryland, Baltimore City? You've represented families. Feel free to where you are.
Okay, great.
What do you think about that? What are your thoughts and concerns?
Well, I'm just happy that we're waking up. I've been fighting this battle for the last 20 years, since 1995, since I first started practicing law. I, like Mr. Canales, grew up in Prince George's County, from Seat Pleasant to Fort Washington, Maryland, attended Friendly High School. I'm currently past president of the Monumental City Bar Association, and currently the chair of the National Bar Association's Rapid Legal Response Team, which is providing legal counsel to protesters who've been arrested free of charge. So that's some of the things that we've been doing. My concerns are my concerns are being alleviated as of May 1st, which was actually May Day, but I call it Gray Day because finally we are getting some semblance of justice, or at least the wheels of justice are beginning to turn. Police accountability, police reform has always been something that I've been very passionate about. I've been screaming at the top of my lungs before the Baltimore City Council. I've gone down to Annapolis to advocate for passage of at least 17 bills relating to police reform. We were not successful, I don't believe, on any of those bills. But I'm glad, and we warned even at that time that there will be another Freddie Gray and another Freddie Gray and another Freddie Gray until we actually get some police reforms in this state. One of my primary concerns is the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. I've been trying to repeal or advocating the repeal of certain provisions, specifically the 10-day rule, and I'll just stop right there so that I don't take anybody else's time. I'll tell you some more about the 10-day rule, I'm sure, when we get into this.
Thank you so much. We want to talk about that 10-day rule. Yes, next, Reverend.
I bring a unique perspective as a former law enforcement officer and retired police chief, as well as from the academic side. I'm with North Carolina Central University, so there's that research perspective, as well as being a man of God who has been active in the community and engagement for over 30 years. And so, Pastor, I knew to write something down to stick to the time real quickly here. One framework for analysis that may aid in better discussing the serious dynamics of police and black male relations is to look at it from historical police accountability, black community accountability, and church accountability perspectives. Any related legislation should have at its core measurable initiatives that strengthen the relationships between communities of color and law enforcement. Historical. Police and black men have had an adversarial relationship dating back to the slave police during their patrols to capture and return runaway slaves. This continued throughout the enforcement of oppressive laws for centuries, including the Jim Crow era and Civil Rights era. Riots in the black community in response to aggressive and violent police action is not new, as demonstrated in the riots about every decade for the past 50 years. Police accountability. Many law enforcement and criminal justice organizations, administrators, politicians, and officers have simply missed the mark on understanding the depth of distrust and anger many black males have towards police. Missed opportunities include organizational transformation, strategic community engagement, mandatory foot patrols, problem-solving toolkits, hiring and promotion practices, assessment, early warning systems, citizen complaint tracking, neighborhood meetings, and patrol plan studies, to name a few. Black community accountability. The Black community must do a better job of acting proactively and eliminating the us versus them mentality towards law enforcement, taking ownership of our government. Missed opportunities include participating in and mandating programs that demand police community engagement, voting for relevant positions, attending local government meetings, attending hiring sessions for police chief and city managers, and sponsoring neighborhood law enforcement meetings. The Black community must continue to acknowledge the need to address victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, gang crime, and black-on-black crime. There is a need to acknowledge the many young Black males who are in need of formal mentors. And finally, the church. Missed opportunities include sermons and Bible studies on the topic, sponsoring roundtable discussions such as this with law enforcement, and teaching Christian men how to mentor young men on what to do when encountering the police. The church should develop a spiritual, not carnal-minded approach to the topic, aggressively using the power of prayer and action, delivering our neighborhoods from crime and poverty.
Thank you so much, Reverend Herring. Thank you so much. Sarah Love, Public Policy Director for the ACLU of Maryland.
Thank you, Pastor Coates. Thank you for having me here, and thank you all for being here tonight. The ACLU, I think, is both incredibly saddened by what's been happening, but also very hopeful. Hopeful because we see so many people finally standing up and saying, no more, no more. Since our inception, the ACLU of Maryland has worked against structural racism and for racial justice. And what some of you may not know is the issue of police accountability and transparency and racial policing has been something that we have worked on, much like Attorney Gordon, for many, many years. We brought the first driving while Black case in Maryland. We sued the city of Baltimore for illegal arrests under former Mayor O'Malley and his zero-tolerance policing. We have worked with the Baltimore Police Department on their stop and frisk policies, trying to change those policies. We have put out reports that showed that despite comparable rates of use, police arrest African Americans for minor marijuana possession at rates far more than they arrest whites. We released a briefing paper this past March that showed across the state of Maryland, at least 109 people have died as a result of a police encounter from 2010 to 2014. This is an issue we deeply care about. We litigate, we try to get out and talk to folks as much as possible, and my job is to work in the legislature to try to change laws. So I look forward to this conversation. I welcome hearing from all of you, and I'm just pleased to be here, so thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. Senator Ramirez.
Thank you so much. It's good evening. How's everyone? It's a pleasure to be here. I grew up in Mount Rainier in Prince George's County. That's where I went to school, graduated from Northwestern. And Prince George's County is very dear to my heart. I now get the great opportunity to represent Prince George's County in that part of the county. And it's, I sit on judicial proceedings, and it's when asked to come here, I said yes, of course. Judicial proceedings, here's many of the bills that will probably be discussed, many of the bills that were heard, but sometimes not voted on, and it is an issue. That's not to say that we haven't done some bills, but we haven't done enough. That's a fair statement. I want to mention a couple of the bills that we passed this session, and that's, we did, in the last couple of years, we passed legislation to make paraphernalia and marijuana, decriminalize it. I think Sarah mentioned that it disproportionately affected certain communities of color, African American communities, and we saw that. And that's one of the things that I think we strive to reform the laws that we have in the books now that disproportionately affect certain communities over others. And I think that's a major problem. One of the bills that we also worked on with the ACLU and many of my colleagues dealt with the body cameras, body-worn cameras. And believe it or not, we've been working on this for a couple years. And I think that was a victory. Did it do everything? Will it solve everything? No, but I think that it lays groundwork where I always said that I think if we have the technology, we should have law enforcement wearing body-worn cameras when they're on duty, and unless it's nothing, anything, if they're not on duty, obviously not, but when they're encountering folks, they should have it on. Statistics have shown that when police wear body-worn cameras, complaints go down, and I think that's a good thing. I think that's where accountability starts. Will it solve racism and everything else we still see? Probably not, but it would hold more people accountable, not just law enforcement, but us as well, the community. And I think one of the things we should strive is to build that trust between the community and law enforcement. And just this morning, I was at a community event, and one of my constituents said, Victor, what we should also do is also teach our kids and our communities how we should and what our rights are when we are approached by police officers, right? And I think that's something that's missing. And so I look forward, I'm glad that I'm here, I'm glad that you invited me. I know that I discussed this issue for a very long time, but it's an issue that affects every community, but it disproportionately affects minority communities and low-income communities, and that's not fair.
Thank you so much, Senator Ramirez. Carlos Acosta, who is the Inspector General for the Prince George's County Police Department.
Thank you, Pastor. Yes. Thank you for having me. Good evening. I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk with you today. My background is I was both a local, I was a Montgomery County, Prince George's County prosecutor. I was a federal prosecutor for the Department of Justice. When I was there, the Prince George's County Police Department reached out to me and said that they had a position they hadn't filled in a long time. This position of Inspector General, would I come and take that job? And I said, well, let me look at it, and let me give you some ideas of what I think it should do. And I looked at it, and I gave them some ideas, and I said, well, one of the things that you have to do, though, is you got to give me in writing a promise that you can't fire me. And that really threw them. And they said, why? And it's like, listen, if the Inspector General works in your department, and I'll tell you, my research at that time, this is 3 years ago, showed that I only could find 6 Inspectors General inside police departments. Usually you'll see them outside part of a municipality, for example, the Inspector General of Chicago, or of New York City, or of Washington, D.C. It's unusual to find one inside a department. But if you're inside the department, your concern is, well, if the chief doesn't like what I have to say, I may get fired. And I've got a mortgage, and I got kids, and I don't want to get fired, so I'm not going to say things that's going to upset the chief. So I said, listen, I got a great job with the feds. I can retire there, so if you're asking me to leave that and join you, I want to be able to say that I'm telling you the truth, and that I'm going to be able to show you the mirror, and you're going to be able to have to say, well, we don't like that, but I can't fire you. And he gave it to me in writing. I have a copy of it in a file folder, and my lawyer has another copy of it. So, and that's the truth. So at that point, then, I felt confident leaving my good federal job and coming to Prince George's County, the county where the first place I remember playing on a playground was in Prince George's County, Langley Park, where my parents raised me, and then, you know, I moved around a bit. But this is where I started. And so this is the community that I see where my children grow up, where my friends' kids are, etc. And so I came on board to help the police department take a look at itself in the mirror and be able to say, all right, you're not doing a bad job. Can you do better? And we know there's nothing perfect on earth. Anything can be better, and everything can be better, and it only gets better if you work at it. I've worked with Senator Ramirez for 2 years now on the body-worn camera issue. That's something I deeply believe in. The police department believes in it. And this is years before the issues that we've seen almost on a weekly basis now, where we see that statistically, as Senator Ramirez said, police departments who adopt this, and it's very expensive, their complaints go down. And the fact of the matter is, just like we as children, if we know mom and dad are watching, we're going to behave. And if a police officer knows that at any time, and part of our policy is that the chief will randomly pick videos or somebody appointed by the chief, and we're just going to look. We're going to constantly look, and you know you are being watched to behave. Police officers behave, and frankly, citizens do too. Everybody understands that. The body camera is better, in my mind, than relying on citizens to do what they're doing, but I like that citizens do that because, once again, officers know there's 330 million cell phone cameras in the United States. 330 million. Most of the things that we've seen as citizens on TV have been citizen cameras. And things that perhaps an officer may have said in the past that would have gotten them off has conflicted completely with what we've seen from that citizen's camera. We need to have officers wearing those cameras. I believe that this county government will be supporting that. We've put a proposal in supporting that. In fact, the chief put me in charge of pushing that within our department. I worked with Senator Ramirez on the governor's Office for Crime Control and Prevention to do a study on that. I was very happy with the legislation, though it was a little legislation, to start us in this direction. When people are accountable and the process is transparent, we may not always like what happens, but we know that we saw it, people aren't hiding things, and then, just as was said at the end here, if there are problems, we need to change those problems. We need to change either the government that's not changing it for us, and we hold them accountable too. And we can't do that if we don't know the facts. So that is probably the biggest thing I'll be doing this year, alongside any other issues that come up. I don't run internal affairs, I oversee internal affairs. So when people say, I have a problem with the process, the first thing I'll ask them is, did you get into the process? And then I'll look to see if it's broken. So absolutely, speak up. Don't be afraid to talk, and you can always reach out to me. I'm on the internet, and I'm very easy to get. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Reverend Yeary, who is the senior pastor of the Douglas Memorial Community Church in Baltimore and the policy director for the state NAACP, who has been in Annapolis on these issues. Reverend Yeary, what concerns you? What's on your heart about this issue before we get right into some of the issues that have been raised?
Dr. Coates, thank you for gathering. Let me give you my thoughts, deja vu. For the last several days, not too far from my church, since the declaration of a state of emergency at 10 o'clock at night, I'd found myself at the intersection of Pennsylvania Avenue and North Avenue, trying to make sure that residents in a community that was crying out for help didn't get caught up in the system for violating curfew. The reason I say it's deja vu is it took me back to 1968. By show of hands, how many of you remember 1968? There were some difficult summers leading up to 1968 and the backlash after Dr. King's assassination. Atlanta, Newark, Cincinnati, other places. 1968, after Dr. King's assassination, there was also a backlash in Baltimore City. Prior to 68, there was the formation of the National Commission on Civil Disorders, better known as the Kerner Commission. When the Kerner Commission published their report in 1968, they analyzed a few of the contributing factors that had led to some of the tensions between African American communities that led to some of the uprisings. One of the factors then, as is one of the factors now, was police. And so I'm going to read to you verbatim what the Kerner Commission found, and then I'm going to leave you with the two words that I started my comments with, deja vu. Now I quote, "It is the convergence of all these factors that makes the role of the police so difficult and so significant. Almost invariably, the incident that ignites disorder arises from police action. Harlem, Watts, Newark, and Detroit, all the major outbursts of recent years, were precipitated by arrest of Negroes by white police for minor offenses. But the police are not merely the spark. In discharge of their obligation to maintain order and ensure public safety in the disruptive conditions of ghetto life, they are inevitably involved in sharper and more frequent conflicts with ghetto residents than with the residents of other areas. Thus, to many Negroes, police have come to symbolize white power, white racism, and white repression. And the fact is that many police do reflect and express these white attitudes. The atmosphere of hostility and cynicism is reinforced by a widespread perception among Negroes of the existence of police brutality and corruption and of a double standard of justice and protection, one for Negroes and one for whites. Last week was deja vu because we are reliving the fear that now being black and being poor is not only a risk factor, it is the only basis upon which you need to establish reasonable suspicion for an encounter between police and community. Until we address that black and poor is not synonymous with being criminal, and get the reprogramming out of the police department around this war on drugs, we're going to be back here sooner than we want to admit.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Year, and thanks to all of you for your opening statements. I want to get right in, and you all have brought up a range of issues, the issue of the over-policing of certain neighborhoods and certain communities, the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, and a range of other things. I want to get right into that. Let's start where Reverend Yeary ended. Are certain communities, our minority and poor communities, is the over-policing of these communities leading to some of the issues that we're facing today? I'm very much interested, Vince, in kind of hearing from you on this. Jay Wendell Gordon and Sarah Love, what do you think about this whole issue of over-policing in minority communities?
As a police officer, or former police officer, I think we all have to take into consideration a number of factors. When the police department is actually engaging in police activity, normally it's based on statistical data. Very seldom is it a situation where the police department is responding to a particular neighborhood and saying, I'm just going to focus on Seat Pleasant and that's all I'm focusing on. I'm not worrying about the rest of the community. They believe that when they're sending out officers to work particular areas, that it's based on need. So those officers that are basically assigned to that area are normally assigned to that area as a result of there being a need. Now, unfortunately, and this is part of my conversation, I'm gonna bleed it over a little bit into the whole body camera discussion. The Fraternal Order of Police is not anti-body camera. In all honesty, we know it's a tool that's out there. I think our biggest issue or concern right now is more the policy and implementation. I'm gonna speak to you now, though, as a father. I have a 22-year-old son who basically is the 22-year-old who likes to hang out, who, when you talk about particular neighborhoods that may wind up being over-policed, where are those cameras predominantly going to wind up being at some certain points in time? In those neighborhoods. Ultimately, what video is actually going to be captured? Our communities. Those communities that basically feel like they're already being over-policed are now going to have Big Brother sitting watching. Our biggest concern when we start talking about the issue of body cameras is just ensuring that there's a fair policy that's out there, ensuring that during the course of this policy being created, that there are some checks and balances associated with it, and that we also understand that communication that needs to take place with regards to why police are in your neighborhoods occurs a little bit more frequently and is a little bit more open so you understand why we're there.
So Vince, the Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police supports body cameras.
The Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police has taken no position currently regarding body cameras, but I will tell you why, just so we're clear. The body camera bill that was actually introduced by Senator Ramirez and Delegate Sidnor actually doesn't provide a whole lot more than just the ability for you to have cameras. It gives some guidance and stuff, but really doesn't get into the nuts and bolts of it. Doesn't really address who can actually get the information, which should be a concern of yours. Doesn't really get into the issue of what data is actually kept and for how long it's kept and things of that nature, which should be a concern of yours. Which basically also, so for as far as we're concerned, is like, show us the policy. As a result of the body camera bill being introduced, we actually have a seat at the table to actually sit and start working on developing the policy, which we're looking forward to.
Are the weaknesses of the body camera bill that you're referencing because actually the body camera bill that was passed was actually not a police accountability bill? As I understand it, it's more of an expansion of the wiretapping provisions, which is something decidedly different from the police accountability bills that were tabled in Annapolis this session. I'm not an expert on it. Others who are here today, we're still gonna go back on this issue. You said the Fraternal Order of Police is not opposed to body cameras, but they don't.
We want to see the details. That's our biggest thing. We need to see the details.
Okay, want to see the details. All right. Jay Wendell Gordon, Sarah Love, our minority communities over-policed. Is that one of the issues that's that's instigating some of these encounters?
I would say the minority community is oppressed by police. What I'm seeing is the abuse of constitutional rights. I'm seeing sadistic behavior. I'm seeing egregious conduct, discourtesy, and runs the gamut.
Put some skin on the bones. What do you mean a violation of constitutional
Well,
rights?
let's talk, well, I can teach, I can teach, that's fine. I can teach, that's fine. Police contact with citizens is limited. A police officer certainly can walk up to you and ask you questions. That's called an accosting. You are free to walk away. In order for a police to exercise some authority over you, he has to have reasonable, articulable suspicion. He just can't grab me by the arm and say, come here, without any reasonable, articulable suspicion. In order for the police officer to arrest you, he has to have probable cause. So you have reasonable, articulable suspicion to stop, probable cause to arrest. Reasonable, articulable suspicion or reasonable suspicion to stop, probable cause to arrest. But what we're seeing in the minority community is that they go straight to an arrest. And when I say arrest, I'm talking about they restrict your freedom of movement. And then what comes next? They're searching through your pockets. You've seen kids with their pants pulled down and their shoes off in the middle of the street. These are abuses. This isn't right. They want, I don't want to sound like a police hater because I'm not. I'm not. But I've seen too much. I do criminal defense work. I've seen too much, I know too much, and that's probably my problem. Because it's hard to distinguish good police officers from bad police officers because they wear the same uniform. Just like they say it's hard to distinguish us because we wear the same uniform. But they want a pass and distinguish themselves, but we don't know the difference. And when I give these talks across the state to my young people, I wish more were here, I tell them to treat police officers like a stray dog. You don't know if that dog is gonna bite you. You don't know what that dog is gonna do. So you don't go up to the dog and you pet him. I'm just sorry. The days of officer friendly are over. We're in a different time now. I mean, we're in a different time from even 5 years ago. So you don't pet that dog, you don't talk to that dog, you let that dog go on about its business. And that's the way you keep your young people safe. That's the way you keep them safe. And also what I like to do, when your young person is stopped by police, he may be driving this automobile. I do this all across the state of Maryland. We all have technology, police have technology. We carry our technology on our person. Police have theirs in the car, they got the fancy computers, they got the cell phones and everything. When your son or your daughter is stopped by police, especially when they're in their car, or even if they're not, pull out this cell phone. And even if they're too nervous to video record, because not everybody's gonna stick a phone in the police officer's face because it makes them upset. But everybody's cell phone, pull them out. Young people in here, got a smartphone, anybody? Hold your smartphones up. Everybody. Everybody who has a smartphone has a video recording device on it, correct? But you probably didn't know you have an audio recording device on it. And when you see those blue lights come on in your rearview mirror, the moment you see them come on, if you feel too nervous to turn on your video recording device, turn on your audio recording device. And you know what? You can take this and you can put it in your pocket. And these things make a wonderful recording. Yes, officer. Why was I pulled over? My tail lights out? Okay. But why are you putting your hands on me? Well, what's going on? Hey, you know, and things like that could happen, but you got your recorder on. And
So people can have their own body camera program
that's right.
in the community.
And thanks to modern technology, when these things occur, you have a beautiful recording that you can give to your attorney. My tail lights out? Okay. Why are you putting your hands on me? And it's beautiful.
So,
and I'm gonna tell you, I didn't think of this. My client did this. My client did this, and I told him I'm gonna tell it everywhere I know. Because we use this, he was stopped for his tail light being out, and he ended up getting assault on the officer, disorderly conduct, trying to disarm an officer. All these charges, he's facing years and years in prison. But thank goodness he had this recording device, because we got the case dismissed as a result of him having this device. And you can record a police officer during the exercise of his public duty. Use it. If you feel too nervous to video record, and that's just as good of evidence as any. And
Thank you so much. Sarah and Senator Ramirez, can we talk about this body camera bill that was passed this legislative session quickly? And I want to be clear, J. Wendell Gordon did not say that the police were dogs.
No.
He did not say they were stray dogs, because I'm going to get all kind of emails. Listen, I want to establish up front that most police are decent people who are sacrificed for their families, for our community. They sacrifice to protect us. And this conversation, regardless of what side of this issue you are on, is not about demonizing all or most police.
I'm just telling you.
But it is in the interest of all of us, even good police officers, to come out on this issue, because it makes it more difficult. I would imagine it makes it more difficult for good police officers, decent police officers, to do their job when there are a few bad apples out there that are contaminating the entire bushel.
Yes, sir.
So I want to be clear, we're not demonizing all police in any respect. So J. Wendell Gordon
Let me clear
did
the
not say
record.
that.
Let me clear the record. I am not demonizing all police officers.
Yeah.
My cousin is a police officer.
Sure.
But I'm telling you how to keep your children safe.
Sure.
Because
Absolutely.
the good police officers come out to things like this. The bad police officers don't.
Right. Sarah, thank you so much. Sarah Love, there's this body camera bill that was passed this legislative session. I received a big letter yesterday from leaders of the General Assembly about, hey, we did this body camera bill. Clarify for us this body camera bill that Senator Ramirez referenced a moment ago.
Okay, Pastor Coates, I'll get there in 1 second, but two quick things I have to say. Senator Ramirez mentioned teaching people about their rights, and Attorney Gordon mentioned that as well. The ACLU has gone around the state and does know your rights trainings, so if anybody is interested, Pastor Coates, if you're interested, we're happy to come and do those trainings. The other thing I'm sorry, but I work for the ACLU, I have to say this. You have the right to record because of our lawsuit. We represented a gentleman who recorded the police, and, well, long story short, anyway, we won, and so we have been educating police departments around the state that, yes, we as citizens have a right to record them when they're exercising their duties. So following up on what Attorney Gordon said, do it. So to answer your question, Pastor Coates, Senator Ramirez actually introduced a very different bill. His bill would have provided minimal standards, exactly the things that Mr. Canales was talking about, minimal standards. You have to notify people that they are being recorded. Why? Well, because people can't change their behavior unless they know they're being recorded. When the camera needs to be turned on and when it needs to be turned off. Minimal privacy standards. What happens to the videos? Who gets access to those? Who can see those? So just very minimal standards, and then we left a lot of other things up to police departments, individual departments, to decide how long those things are retained, you know, what the disciplinary procedures are, and on and on and on. So the original bill was a substantive bill that was born out of participating on the statewide work group that the senator referenced, as well as the Baltimore City work group that we were on as well with other legislators and law enforcement. And we worked on that bill extensively, and there were several amendments to it from the chiefs and sheriffs, but in the end it was pushback from law enforcement that stopped that substantive bill from going forward. So what we have is a bill that just exempts the body-worn cameras from the wiretap statute, because Maryland is what is called a two-party consent state. So both people have to consent to the recording of the conversation. So it exempts the body-worn cameras from the wiretap statute. It sets up yet another commission to study best practices. And then it says that the Maryland Police Training Commission will come up with a set of best practices.
So why is it being called a body camera bill? Senator?
Well, I think, and just to follow up, thank you so much. Because I think the objective is, we want, like, and people say, well, it's another commission. But I think what we want civil rights groups such as NAACP, ACLU, CASA de Maryland, and law enforcement sit down and give recommendations. When you can turn it on, how long you should retain it. I mean, these are things that we should all be able to come together with law enforcement and say, you can have a seat at the table with the community. But at the end of the day, we have to continue working together. Yeah, as it came across, and Sarah mentioned, they tried to amend it saying, oh, that the wiretap exception was gone and that police could do whatever they want, and they were going to come up with their own rules and regulations. And we said, no, we have to have some accountability. And by January of next year, 2016, you have to tell us how are you going to implement the body-worn cameras. And believe it or not, even having that, it was a victory, because if we would have just given them I'm sorry, Vince, if we would have just given law enforcement the right to do whatever they wanted, they could have said, well, this is how we think it should be applied. And and it's not just law enforcement, not just to put them on the spot, but anytime you give full authority, full power to one group, they're gonna do it the best way to benefit that group. And that's just the reality. At the very least, we get an opportunity to say, okay, well, how long are you gonna retain it? You gotta give us an idea when it should be on. And our thought is, if it's not on while you're on duty, there better be a good reason why it's not on, right? And and I applaud the fact that I know Attorney Gordon, and he's a great attorney, but not everybody has a phone, right? I want body cameras to be on every law enforcement officer that's out there in our community, and that's the reality.
So this committee that's coming up over the interim here, in your view, is designed to get us where we need to be on the question of body cameras. I want to ask you a question, and I want to ask Reverend Year if he would say something about this 10-day rule, which has really been also a focus for many of us, many folks who've been concerned about police accountability events. I want you to chime in because we had a good, robust conversation about the 10-day rule. Senator Ramirez, 17 police accountability bills were presented this legislative session, and all 17 of them were tabled by the General Assembly. It's been an issue that many advocates have been concerned about. Why do you think your colleagues didn't allow any of the 17 police accountability bills to come up in the vote in committee this legislative session?
I don't want to put every one of my colleagues in one category, because I think what we do have, and I think people in Prince George's County, we understand that we have to pass reform and change our police practices. And I think for many in Baltimore City and certain other jurisdictions, unfortunately, when these committees are made up, they're made up of folks from around the whole state of Maryland. But I think also, and you have different perspectives. Some people think that if you are trying to pass some police reform, you're somehow weak on crime. They say, oh, you want the streets to be unsafe. You don't want to let the police do their job, et cetera, et cetera. And that is kind of the sentiment sometimes that you get if you're pushing for police reform, for police accountability. I think to a certain extent you're almost made to feel like because that you're not supporting the police.
We had representatives who chair some of the committees from Prince George's County, from this county, who sort of led the movement to table these bills, certainly on the House side. So certainly we've got to look at
Right.
this whole issue of committee, committee leadership, but I think also community responsibility and advocacy as well. So I just wanted to raise that particular issue. It's disconcerting for many people in the community that all 17 of these bills were tabled this session.
No, of course, and just to clarify, look, I probably support all of them. I mean, I'm sure that I do.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, some of the committees, especially in the House, are larger.
Sure.
In the Senate, they're a bit smaller. I would say to the community, look to see where your representatives, how they're voting, how they're advocating, and believe me, if you are out there pushing, you don't have to always come down to Annapolis. Write an email, make a phone call, and let your voices be heard, because it changes.
Now, thank you so much. Now, Vince, before we get to Reverend Year, I wonder if you would respond. Sarah mentioned that these bills were tabled as a result of pressure, and I probably, intimated the same thing in other contexts. Are the police, unions involved at all? Were they involved this legislative session in discouraging movement on these bills, and if so, why?
A couple of things I think that need to be clarified. Of the 17 bills, there was a number of them that were voted within committee. It's not a situation where they actually were just taken and there was no movement whatsoever. There was actually testimony that was provided. The committee itself voted, and in several of these situations, the bill was voted down by the committee. So that was based on testimony that was provided on both sides. The other thing that I want to explain to you as well, so it kind of hopefully takes away, you have advocates on both sides of this equation here. You have the ACLU who's pushing civil liberties. You have our different elected officials who have their role. And my role as president for the Maryland State Fraternal Order of Police is actually to support and be an advocate on behalf of law enforcement officers throughout the state of Maryland. One of the big key things with a lot of these bills and why we were actually opposed to many of them was primarily because the way they were crafted, they either one, attempted to criminalize police officers, we believe, or in certain situations, the bill itself was not drafted in a way that we thought really addressed the core issue. We're going to have
an officer would be criminalized in a bill.
Well, there was a bill that ultimately was going to create a new felony provision if an officer committed a misdemeanor offense. The bill is, and Gordon can actually chime in on this. No, and I will defer to Gordon on the bill, but I will tell you that was basically the bill creates a new felony provision for law enforcement officers.
Okay.
I wasn't, by any sense of I don't have the bill in front of me, so just so we're clear on that. But in reality, what I do need people to understand is that that's all this is there's a process. That process plays out. 90% of the conversations that occurred in Annapolis during the legislative session all revolved around transparency. The majority of those issues, when you deal with transparency, have very little to do with LEOBR. They're more administrative issues that basically had to be addressed.
I hope that the committee process, the committee, this interim committee will take a look at the process, because I know for those of us who went down to Annapolis, they schedule the presentation on these bills in such a way that people who show up at 1 o'clock for the public hearing don't get up until 7 or 8 o'clock. I know several times I went down and I'm there at 12:30 to sign in. And it's like these important bills, whether it's this police accountability issue, I was also down on the foreclosure issue. It's as if, and when we bring people down to testify on these issues, it's incredibly difficult to get people back down there. And, I'm just raising this, Senator, and others, when the chairs of the committee schedule these important bills that they know people are down there to testify on, and they put them at the end of the schedule. They don't communicate on the front end the schedule in which the bills will be heard. So it's not as if the day before, SB 407 is going to be heard at the beginning. You never know. No one knows. We all show up, and it's up to the discretion of the committee chair or whatever. We've really got to look at the process for getting public testimony, because the public is discouraged from coming down to testify. When they take off from their jobs, you're down there all day, and then when you finally get to testify, they want to rush through the people who are allowed to testify. So that's my little commercial here. I'll move on. Listen, Reverend Yeary, this 10-day rule, what is it? Why is it such a problem for those who've been concerned about police accountability? Everyone has been talking about the 10-day rule provision in the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. It's the one thing that I think, most advocates on this issue have talked about, Reverend Yeri, Sarah, Reverend Herring as well. What about this 10-day rule? What is it, and how do we fix it? Can we get his mic on, guys?
I know he knows how to use it.
I know. I'm like, hold on, wait a minute.
Thank you. All right. The 10-day rule is part of a larger conversation when it comes to incidents where there is the possibility of either arrest or discipline of an officer and their right to Fifth Amendment protection against self-incrimination. If they were to request a lawyer in the course of preparing for interrogation, they have up to 10 days to secure counsel before you can move forward with the interrogation. The chief can compel the officer to be interrogated. However, if that is done, the officer is then interrogated under basically a blanket privilege of immunity that is established in the statute.
Can you say that again?
If an officer is compelled to participate in an interrogation by the chief before securing counsel under this 10-day rule, they are interrogated under the privilege of immunity by statute.
Why is that a problem?
Let's think about it.
Community, why is that a problem?
Let's think about it from the perspective of the Freddie Grays of the world. You're interrogated the minute you hit. If you request counsel, your counsel shows up, but there is no standing 10-day rule. There are no procedures, no prescriptions for the reasonableness of the timing, the reasonableness of the length of time, who can do the interrogation, where the interrogation must be done. And so the 10-day rule is really just a broader recognition that police officers get protections by law, by statute, that regular everyday citizens do not get if they find themselves on the other end of that relationship. So it's not just the 10-day rule, it is the 10-day rule in the broader context of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights passed in 1974, which is by most assessors one of the, probably after Rhode Island, the most generous Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights in the country. The other thing that the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights does not have, and I think it ought to have, is it does not have a whistleblower protection as part of the statute. And if we've got good officers that are being handicapped by bad officers, and there is a great disproportion ratio-wise, then the good officers need the protections to weed the bad officers out, and then it doesn't matter if you got 10 days, 2 days, 100 days, as long as the process is fair to the people that they are sworn to protect and serve, then we don't have any problem with the 10-day rule. The problem with the 10-day rule is you get time to work it out, to talk it out, to think it out before you have to give any kind of testimony or reference that you could then be brought back before trial that be challenged on. So we got to deal with it.
Right. Mr. Acosta, what about this? The Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, it's been at the center of all of these conversations. Say something about the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, the 10-day rule, and is it an impediment to transparency in the process?
It absolutely is. I'll say it straight up. When I was a prosecutor, if I'm going to deal with a situation where I've got a police officer, there's a number of things that prosecutors have to do so we don't mess up our case. It's exactly like you said, even if that 10-day rule didn't exist, if an officer were ordered by a chief to give me a statement, that's Miranda violative, right? Because they didn't get the rights that any citizen is going to get in the United States, any resident, to know that, you have a right to remain silent, et cetera, et cetera. So at the point where a chief or an internal affairs division says, you must tell us what happened, 10 days or not, you've just messed up my case as far as the prosecutor is concerned. Everything that officer says is going to taint my case. So for example, in the federal system, we will split up and we'll have 2 prosecutorial teams. One that's looking at whatever the crime might be, and the other one that is literally looking at everything before it gets turned over to the prosecutorial team so it doesn't mess up the case.
Is there something that you or your office is doing to convey and could communicate your concerns about the 10-day rule? You just stated here that it is a problem.
It is the law. It is the law right now. And
It is the law right now,
right, so
but there are advocates trying to get that.
should they change it? Obviously, we'll change our procedures. What I make sure is that our officer doesn't, or our department doesn't make a mistake so that now I can't prosecute an officer who should be prosecuted. And by the same token, officers who have whatever rights they have get those rights. But if let's say there's a disingenuous department out there who screw it up, so all of a sudden, wow, now we can't do anything because we messed up and we ordered them to say something, they'll wash their hands and say, we couldn't have prosecuted this guy. I work very hard with our internal affairs program to follow all constitutional state law. So if I have somebody who's done something wrong and it's criminal, we're going to follow through with it. And we're not going to give anybody the excuse that, oh, well, somebody messed it up.
Look, those who are watching online, you can send us your questions or comments, hashtag MEBC Town Hall. Before I allow Vince to respond to this whole concern about the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, Mr. Acosta, the Prince George's County Police Department, there was a time in which there were a lot of concerns. It was under the spotlight. There's been a lot of change, a lot of improvement. Recently, I sent a link to our congregation and members of the community, a video with the Prince George's County State's Attorney and the Chief of Police, Chief McGaugh, in response to the recent issue here in Prince George's County. It was really refreshing to see the police chief say that we're not going to tolerate, right, this kind of behavior amongst our officers. What happened, briefly, what happened to cause that kind of cultural shift within the department in Prince George's County, and how might some of those steps be a model for, other jurisdictions in our state?
I think if folks who've been around a long time are honest, one of the reasons that the department changed was because the Department of Justice put a lot of focus on this department over decades.
Okay.
All right, change becomes very slow, and it's an institutional and cultural shift, is exactly what you said. And change takes a long time. And the Department of Justice came 3 different times to the police department saying, we are unhappy with what you're doing. There's a pattern in practice that is incorrect. And they, in essence, forced the department to change. And that's just the way it is. And we've gotten to a point now where the department has understood we either police ourselves or DOJ will continue to police us. And that, frankly, that was one of the reasons they reinstituted my position.
So the DOJ coming in was very, very important.
Absolutely.
So in this case, in Baltimore City, the city mayor has been coming under a lot of scrutiny. Is this really something that a mayor has the ability to shift and change? And is it really something that the Department of Justice needs to come in to help? Is this misplaced blame that's being put on the mayor of the city of Baltimore?
I can't speak that, but I'll say this. Nationally, you see city after city realizing, are we getting to where Baltimore just went through? And they are inviting DOJ to come in and say, listen, if we don't come to you and you can't help us with your resources, we know you're going to sue us and you're just going to take over our department. What can you do? Albuquerque did it. There's several other cities that have reached out and said, for example, Ramsey did it both in DC and in Philadelphia.
Sure.
And he understands that you can't buck that, and sometimes the problem is bigger than what you can handle. It's very hard to tell, for example, the people who are funding you, your city council, your county council, to become modern, you got to spend $40 million. And they'll say, we're not going to do it, for example, like in New Orleans. But when DOJ says you've got to change, they're going to have to figure it out.
I want to get Reverend Yuri to chime in here. Then Vince, I want you to respond. Then Reverend Herring, I want to talk about this whole notion of independent oversight, right? It's been a part of the conversation as well in different contexts. Reverend Herring.
Real quick, in Baltimore City, back in October, the mayor and the commissioner asked DOJ to come in by way of a collaborative process to look at what was going on in the department. The Office of Civil Rights was there waiting on the first update, which was due to come out in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Yesterday, many in the faith community and the advocacy community met with our new Attorney General, Loretta Lynch. We asked of her to begin a pattern or practice investigation of the department. This morning, the mayor, on behalf of the city, also requested a pattern or practice investigation voluntarily on behalf of the city, which means now when we talk about what an executive can do, they can determine at what level of engagement they would want the Department of Justice to review their police department's practices. I think that is up to each executive to consider, but in this case, the mayor started more progressively last fall. When things got tighter over the last several weeks, she stepped it up today, and we believe that a pattern or practice investigation will begin imminently in Baltimore City.
Thank you, thank you. Listen, if you have questions that you want to raise and put out on the table, you can come to one of the mics that are in the aisle. You can do that. We want questions, not sermons with 3 points and a close. Pointed questions, if you'll come to the mics in the aisle. Vince Canales, president of the Maryland Fraternal Order of Police. What about this whole issue of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights and the 10-day rule? Tell them what you told me a few months ago.
And we actually, that was probably what we spent probably about 20 minutes of our conversation on. And what I wanted to basically express to the community here is that what you have to understand is that law enforcement officers must provide a statement, period. Unlike the example that was provided earlier, an individual who basically is in an interrogation room being interviewed by a police officer who says, I want an attorney, the conversation ends. For the most part, the conversation ends. Unlike Law and Order, I very seldom, actually I never in my 21-year career seen an attorney knock on the door and say, I'm here for my client. It doesn't happen. The conversation's over. Law enforcement officers don't have that ability. If a law enforcement officer is performing his function, based on Maryland law right now, he has 10 days to obtain counsel and provide a statement. However, the officer basically is foregoing his constitutional right to just say, I'm not saying anything whatsoever. Do your case, and I'm not going to talk to you until it's time for trial. That's a responsibility that, and in my mind, the way that I perceive this, that's a much more restrictive law on our law enforcement community. Because at the end of the day, they have to tell you something. So as far as I'm concerned, I mean, and the other issue that comes up with regards to this conversation as well is the idea that where's the data at to support that LEOBR and the 10-day rule has created any problems? We've asked, and I mean, during the course of the conversation that occurred in Annapolis, the mayor of Baltimore brought that up as one of her key points, and she was asked, provide us with statistical data that shows that ultimately that creates the problem, that's creating a problem. She has yet to basically provide that data. So, I mean, as far as we're concerned, we're saying, look, we're open to having the conversation. We're willing to sit and talk about ways to basically work with within the process. But we're also saying, look, understand this. Tell us why this aspect of it creates this issue. It becomes the soundbite currently.
Well, let's kind of stay here, Sarah and Wendell. Let's kind of stay here for a minute before we get to. That's a
real quick. I think he said something that I want to make sure that we're clear on. Even an officer that invokes his right under the 10-day rule, they are not obligated by constitutional protection to incriminate themselves in an interrogation. They still have Fifth Amendment protections. So to give the impression that just because you get counsel and then you're going to go into an interrogation that an officer somehow is going to put themselves in a vulnerable position is not only naive. In the place that I come from, up where the people just went through a pretty difficult week, that just don't make no sense. So let's stop thinking that somehow or another they're going to do us a favor once they get counsel to talk about something when there is a potential that there might be discipline or prosecution. They do not have, we cannot statutorily impose on anybody that you give away your Fifth Amendment protections by statute or otherwise, whether you got a 10-day rule or a 2-day rule. So we got to skip that. So that part about him talking when they don't have to, they still don't have to, even when they get a lawyer.
And if I
Sarah?
may, though,
Sir.
if I may, though, I mean, you talk about being naive. It's not a matter of being naive. The reality of the matter is that an officer's employment is basically at risk if that officer fails to provide the statement. The officer has to weigh whether or not his employment or basically potentially incriminating himself, which I hate to use that term because in the majority of the situations that we're talking about, the officer is performing within his duties, his or her duties. So I don't want to paint that picture that that officer is because they invoke that 10 days that they've done something wrong. In reality, it takes time for investigations to occur, witnesses to be interviewed, evidence to be collected, and then basically in order to conduct a proper investigation and in order to get the result that you ultimately are looking for, you would want those things in place before you ever spoke.
This is really the crux of the matter. We have all of the key players who are going to be a part of this conversation going forward. Sarah, Jay Wendell, and then I want to hear from Reverend Herring about this whole notion of should there be separate, oversight, or should there be independent, prosecutors when there are instances of alleged police brutality. Sarah, come on, let's get into this Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, the 10-day rule. You've heard what Vince has shared. Jay Wendell, then I want you to follow up. Yeah.
Vince and I have had many, many, many conversations about this.
Please turn the mic up.
Let's tease this out a little bit. The Law Enforcement Officer Bill of Rights is about internal investigations into officers and potential misconduct. That is entirely separate from the Fifth Amendment and their right not to incriminate themselves. And these two issues get conflated a lot. It is true that an officer cannot be, should not be, compelled to testify against him or herself under the Fifth Amendment. It is also true, as Vince said, that they can be directed by their supervisor. You have to answer this question. And if they don't, then they're disobeying a direct order, so they could get fired for that. If they do, what happens is because of their Fifth Amendment rights, that statement cannot be used against them in a criminal procedure. Nor can anything that comes from that statement, and this is important because ordinary citizens don't have that. We have a Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate ourselves, but if we say something and it is found that that was in violation of our Fifth Amendment right, the so-called fruits of the poisonous tree can still be used against us. So we have that aspect. But focusing on the internal disciplinary action, it's not just in police brutality cases, it's in all cases. I could not fathom my employer coming to me and saying, I think you did something wrong, and I say, sorry, you can't talk to me for 10 days. Yes, officers have a right to get an attorney. We all have a right to get an attorney. We believe in that. But there is also a process. There is also a transparency and accountability that citizens deserve to know what happened, that a department deserves the ability to interrogate their officers and to find out what happened and then to go through the disciplinary process. So this 10-day rule, it is a problem. It is a real problem.
Wendell?
Doesn't take 10 days to tell the truth. The truth is the truth. So all these other arguments are quite frankly absurd in my view. The truth is going to be the truth on the first day, the 10th day, the 100th day, or even 100 years from now. So we need to repeal the 10-day rule. And the person responsible for tabling these 17 pieces of legislation is Joseph Valerio. Some of y'all may know him. He's out here in some of your neighborhoods. Remember that. Joseph Valerio didn't even find it important enough to stay in the room when testimony was given by heartbroken mothers and fathers who lost their loved ones as a result of their encounter with police officers. I say, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights is one of the most deadliest pieces of legislation to come out of the General Assembly since 1974, more deadly than I would say than the Death Penalty Act between 74 and the time the Death Penalty Act was repealed. That's how deadly this bill is, because it provides protection and cover for murderers. That's how I feel.
Wow. I want to get to our questions, but Reverend Herring, there's been a lot of conversation around should there be an independent, should we allow the police essentially to investigate themselves? And would it be better to have independent prosecutor investigation, if I'm using the correct terms. What do you think about this issue?
I think we have to go back to a couple other basic issues, and I'm a pretty basic kind of guy. I think that Mother Sally, Cousin Junebug, the average person in the community, they want to know, what does this matter for me on the average moment, on the average day? When I'm at home, 2 a.m. in the morning, when my son or daughter is walking the street, 3 a.m., the average moment, what does it mean to me? I think that's important because over decades, what we have is we've talked around the minority underserved community, and that's why we're where we are right now. We have so much going on, we forget and lose focus on the purpose why we're having all the conversations, the laws, and everything else. So for me, when you look at the track record, it gets pretty frustrating. One thing for sure, if you're going to use your phone, cool if you decide, make sure you teach your young man or woman when and how to pull out that phone. Because if you don't do that very clearly, there's a problem. So telling them to use the phone, I'm good with it, but make sure you go far enough to say, now understand, don't pull that phone out at the inopportune time, and when you're stopped, don't be shuffling around in your car. It's sometimes the basic stuff that we miss that is so relevant there. The other thing that we're really missing going to the council is trust. We can bring all the laws we want, we can have all the policies we want, we can do all that we want, but by the end of the day, it comes down to, can I trust my local law enforcement officer? And for the local law enforcement officer, can I trust, or what do I do when I know I'm stopping somebody? So that means, and it comes that, it has to be more of a systematic measure, day in and day out. People need to be given specifics on what they can do to transform and increase that trust between the two. So for the independent councils, if that trust is there with local law enforcement, the independent council is not relevant. If that trust is not there, the independent council is relevant. I do think starting off an independent council shows we have nothing to hide. But it should be with the goal of, and we don't like to do it, we don't like to say, let's take these 10 years to set the strategies so the councils and the laws are not necessary. And we have to have that process.
Thank you so much, Reverend Herring. Let's get these questions from the audience here. Let's get your questions, these 4 questions here.
Okay. Good evening. Hello?
It's on.
Okay. Hello, Pastor. First, I want to commend you for lighting our fire for social justice as we have gone forward. I've tried to participate with you on several of our protests, and we've done some and participated in the research as well. And I have this because I want, if you could kind of back up a little bit, I wanted to show this to the FOP representative. Can you read this?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I was pulled over because I was told he couldn't read this on 495, 3 days before Freddie Gray was pulled out. The crux of the matter is illegal stops, random stops. The man told me when he pulled me over on 95, I wasn't speeding, nothing was wrong with my truck. He said, your brake light was out. My brake light was not out, and I said so. Then he said, I can't see your license plate, but I'm going to give you a warning, and, I'll let you go. And I looked at him, and I just said, okay, and I'm doing my 10 and 2 and everything, make sure I don't get shot, because 20 years ago, I was pulled over for something that I didn't do.
What's your question?
My question is, for the FOP representative, is you made this statement about logistics determine where officers are patrolling. In Prince George's County, the richest black county in the country, you have black men and women running around in nice cars and trucks. Why are we randomly pulled over and getting random enforcement, selective enforcement, I want to say, because I went back and I asked people who had these covers on their license plate, had they ever been pulled over before, and the answer was no. And I asked about a half dozen people, you know, and I think that's part of the issue is you live in Prince George's County, this stuff shouldn't happen. And then by the same token, I also want you to follow up with the change for the FOP internally, because for the Policeman's Bill of Rights, because what's happening is you guys are fighting it. You haven't taken a position. And I would suggest to you that you either initiate change within, because I'm also standing up here as a voter to say, Mr. Valerio and anybody else that's standing in the way of those 17 bills, that might have been their last time to be in the way, because we're on the march now.
Thank you so much. Let's get the next question. Let's try, in the interest of time, I really need you to state a pointed question on this topic.
Definitely.
And we'll keep in mind the whole issue of the discretion that officers, oh, you have a tail light out, and things like that. Yeah.
Okay. I'd like to say that I recognize that the FOP is a very strong lobby. What I want to know, and I realize it's an adversarial system, what is the FOP doing in order to kind of incorporate some change and recognize everybody knows it's a problem? I want to know, what are you doing outside of just kind of forming a shield to protect people with a job? What are y'all doing?
I'll start off with first, thanks for the question. And I'm not being facetious when I say this, but I'm here. The reality of the matter is I'm not sure that, you know, this conversation a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, that you have an individual from the FOP that's sitting on this panel, you know, talking to the community. My role as FOP president in Prince George's County was to do everything we could to try and develop relationships within those communities. My role now as the Maryland State FOP president, which I took over this last August, is to do the same thing. I started with conversations with the ACLU, the NAACP. Jay Wendell and I, over the course of this as well, have had started developing the ability to have some conversations. We're here. I want to be a part of this community. We want to basically be engaged in these conversations. And I want to, you know, there are going to be situations where we're going to agree, and there are going to be opportunities, I'm sure, we're going to agree to disagree. But, you know, we're here. We want to be engaged. I want to know what the issues are. I want to try and figure out what some of the problems are and what we can do to work collaboratively to move forward. So
I hope that these conversations lead to constructive change, because we need to make sure that we avoid another Baltimore in another part of our state. As the ACLU has stated, 109 Marylanders have died in the last 4 years from 2000. We need to make sure that these conversations lead to constructive change. I am certainly glad you're here, Vince. Yes, let's get these questions here from others.
I was dared by my aunt to come up here and share this
Please
question.
speak into the mic. We can't hear you.
I was dared by my aunt to come up here and share this question because she was supposed to come up here. I wrote the question for her. So I'm kind of nervous. But I said, y'all talked about what teenagers should do if a police come up to us, but what should they do when they approach us? What should they do differently?
They should be respectful. They should tell you why they're approaching you. And be nice if they told you you had the right to walk away and not talk to them. But you do have that right.
Thank you.
Anything else? Vince, you want to add anything to that? You know, what should the police do when, you know, how should they govern themselves when they're encountering?
As a former police officer, I mean, what you have to understand is that, as it was previously stated, you have a right and an expectation that you should be treated respectfully. There's no question to that. I don't think that's changed anywhere, not only in Prince George's County, but anywhere throughout the state of Maryland. So, but the next thing is, you know, who the officer is when they're approaching you. They should introduce themselves. They should actually tell you what the purpose of the stop and why they're pulling you over, or why they've detained you for a few minutes to talk to you about a particular issue. And, you know, at that point, you do have the right to ask questions. There's nothing wrong with you asking, once the officers basically approached you, you know, what's going on, why am I being detained? It's hard without knowing a particular frame of reference for what you're talking about.
In a hypothetical situation similar to what happened to Freddie Gray, if we temporarily suspend the issue of whether he had a pocket knife, whether it was visible or not, if a police officer approaches a young man in the neighborhood and that young man runs away, is that in and of itself an action that, if he's not doing anything else, he's not found to be have drugs or anything else, is running away from the police something that it's regarded as something that someone can be arrested for?
Can I punt this to one of the lawyers?
That is one factor
As one
that an officer consider. One factor among many. It can't be the sole factor, but it could be other factors attendant to that, such as the neighborhood, his observations. I mean, those are the things that we as the defense attorneys are evaluating. What, in addition to just running, where was he running, why was he running, what's going on around him? There are multiple factors that the officer has to evaluate in order to make that stop.
Thank you. Next question. Let's get a few questions here.
Good evening. My issue with police accountability is that it happens after something tragic, something sad, something deplorable happens. So my question is, what preventative measures besides body cameras can be taken to ensure that there is a respect between the community and police? For example, police being required to spend time in the communities that they police before they go out into uniform, or just required to spend X amount of hours in those communities per year, just so that they can have a relationship with the people of the community. That way they kind of have a understanding of, this boy is a bad boy, he gets in trouble all the time, but I know his mother, and I know she's working hard and she's trying to help him. So instead of beating him down, we can figure out a way to work with the mother to try to help him out.
Thank you. Let's get, yes,
I can respond to that.
Yes.
Okay, and briefly, number one, with all respect to the officers that I work with every day, police officers don't solve crimes. Communities solve crimes. Officers and police departments that work with their communities are successful. Hands down, every time. If you look at, for example, New York City, where they had a terrible system, stop, question, frisk, and they antagonized a community for about a decade, I can assure you they will be reaping what they sowed for another decade. It's going to take 10 years to get past that. So first thing is, and one of the things I think we try to do is, as a police department, you don't have to, I'm dying here, thanks. You don't have to own the problem to learn from it, all right? So one of the things that we do, and I work very closely with our training academy, as we see problems in other police departments, we immediately look to our department and say, are we doing that, and how can we not do that? So, for example, just so you know, every police officer in the state of Maryland has to do 40 hours of in-service training every year. Every year we change that tremendously based on what we're seeing across the nation, what we're hearing from our community as to what they want to see the police officers do. Take a look. Have you seen the new police cruisers lately? Instead of being white with blue, they're gray and blue. Does anybody can tell me what's on the back of those cruisers? First to serve. What this police chief is trying to push down and remind, because the officers know that, that's why they became officers, is we are servants. We serve the public, and the better job we do doing that, frankly, the better job they do of solving crime. So I will tell you, what we try to do is stay awake on what everybody else is going through, try not to have those problems, and then when we do have issues, recognize them, admit them, and retrain, because training is how you're going to change people and the culture.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I want to get some of the other questions before it gets too late. There's several others who are in line. Yes.
And it's actually really helped to at least start the conversation with the police officer, because it's almost getting to know the police officer who's in your community. And I think, and it's good for both, because the community gets to know the police officer, and the police officer gets to know the community, because things happen. And so I would suggest that maybe we start having many more of those, more community policing. I think that's
Improve those
what it's called.
relationships. Let's get some of these questions here. Yes.
I'd like to ask,
Speak
well,
into the
first,
mic, please.
first I would like to say, I feel like officers abuse their authority because they have no fear of consequence after their actions. What exactly can the common citizen do to change the judicial system and consequences given to police officers due to their offense?
Well, what can the what do?
Common citizens.
Common citizens, okay.
Okay.
Citizens. What can the citizens do?
Can I just pass, just real
I want to get to, we're sort of getting to an hour. I want to kind of hear the questions, then we can kind of give some final comment in response to the questions. Thank you so much. What can citizens do? Yes.
Hi. Hello. I was just, I don't know, I might be going off a little bit, but I was wondering about this 10-day rule. Now, does that have something to do with the officers wearing cameras? Because if they're wearing cameras, then if the event is videoed, then they don't have, I mean, will they still have a 10-day rule? Because I know in the city of Baltimore, for example, they have cameras all over the place. That was the first place I ever seen cameras. It really shocked me.
But they don't work when you need them to work.
Well, I don't know if they, I don't know that.
They end up focused in the opposite direction, or they're not working at all.
But I don't know that. But my point.
How will the cameras impact the 10-day rule?
Exactly. My point is the camera's already there in the community. If I walk down the street, I'm on camera.
Oh, yeah, to catch you.
Okay? So I don't have no incrimination protection. My question.
Yes, great. Yes.
Hi. I had a friend who was pulled over on BW Parkway and at night because the officer told her her tail light was out. I'm nervous. And so I read in magazines, seen on TV, that if you are afraid to go to a public area and then stop. So she drove along and she pulled in front of her house. The officer got out the car, asked her why didn't she stop before, and then she told me he put a gun to her head. And so I tried to get her to file a complaint, but she wouldn't. She said the next day he came to her house and gave a whole spiel about something. And so she promised him that she wouldn't file a complaint. And he told her that he wouldn't show up in court for something. But my question is this: what is best practices for females who travel alone, and maybe not just females, at night when we see these blue lights?
Best practices, right.
Again.
I want to hear all the questions.
Oh,
Then
okay.
we're going to come back and give you, and then
Remember
we'll
that.
summarize
Best
everything. Let's get this question here, and then we'll come back in line. Let's get these questions quickly if we can frame them.
I'd like to say, I like what I'm hearing tonight in terms of community and police working together and having a rule of engagement for the young people. But how do we translate that into our communities? How do we get you to go to our schools, and particularly in the troubled neighborhoods, to tell these kids, don't run when you see the police, don't stick your hands in your pocket? What is the rule of engagement that these children should be following, and how do we get pastors involved, more involved, and schools and so forth?
Great, great. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Good evening. I just have a quick question for the FOP representative. Under what circumstances is it permissible for a law enforcement officer to kill an unarmed person?
To kill an unarmed person. Okay.
Are we answering that one now?
We can answer
You want to, just 2 seconds?
First off, just so I'll be here at the end of this as well, so it's not, we can continue the conversation after this. You just gave me just this big picture and just said, they threw the grenade, and I'm like, okay, I don't really know how to address that specifically without saying there are a number of mitigating factors throughout any investigation, anytime an officer decides to deploy lethal force. I think, I have to have a little bit more detail than simply they were just unarmed.
Well, maybe you can go through the force continuum.
Again, I just tend to, even with the force continuum, I think there's still, without, there's a lot more detail that's required in that question. I think the biggest problem that we're facing, and I'm listening to the questions and to kind of address a few of them, is education has to start occurring within our communities. not only education from the standpoint of with the young lady, what do you do if you're pulled over and basically how do you interact? It also is, what are your rights basically once you're stopped by the police officers? What can you and what can't you do? What's the complaint process for the woman that basically was just here expressing that a gun was put to her friend's head? How do you go about filing a complaint? More community engagement with regards to not only the coffee clubs, but doing this a lot more frequently. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make, and real quick, and I'll stop, when you talk about the Prince George's County Police Department, a lot of times there are events that are going on, advertising and actually getting it out to the community and getting people engaged is the difficult part. So, I mean,
In
I
addition
can have
to
that
the
conversation
40
with you.
hours that Mr. Acosta mentioned, are there any other cultural sensitivity? You mentioned the community being educated. What's being done to sort of educate and sensitize the police officers?
And as Mr. Acosta expressed, every year that in-service training component changes, and it's normally driven by what's the hot issue of the moment at that point in time. So what winds up happening is if it's, I know a couple years ago it was disabilities, individuals with disabilities, be it mental or physical. And that was kind of the big issue. It was an incident that occurred up in Frederick that actually kind of pushed that, went throughout the state. So what happened was there was a lot more focus at the time, I think, in in-service training dealing with how do you address individuals with disabilities. So I mean, it happens. Sometimes it's just a year behind.
So he would need more information. Yes, let's get these questions here, then we're going to try to wrap things up.
First of all, I'd like to say that on behalf of all mothers in the nation, I am a mother who has lost their child due to law enforcement brutality. My first question is to Ms. Love. My question to you is, what does the Patriot Act have to do with the injustices that are taking place right now? The ability to just stop, search, seize, do whatever they want to do. And also to Mr. Vince, you have a prime opportunity right now. You said that you have working relationships with the communities. I'd like to know what those relationships are. In addition to that, I would ask you, after 22 years on the force yourself, did you ever discharge and kill anyone? If you did not, what is the difference in the culture then and the culture now within the police department?
All right. Our prayers for you, and sorry to hear about your loss.
I'm going to just read from my paper. Federal law, has federal law, the 3 strikes and you're out law passed? If so, how does that affect lower cities or communities? So does it really make sense to pass legislation about marijuana, given poor and minority stuff, that kind of thing? How should you tell your child to interact with police? And I want more specifics, like detail per se, but, and you vote these people in office solely because of their name, and that's sort of half the problem.
All right. Let's get one question from our audience. Some of you got a couple questions. Let's get one question from the audience. Yeah.
What can we do to be more politically aware of what's going on in our country as Black youth, also to help create a good relationship with our fellow police?
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening. My question is nepotism considered as a major, is nepotism considered as a major issue within the Maryland Police Department and within police departments nationwide? No. And I ask that question because my first job out of college, I worked as a dispatcher for a police department in Illinois. And what I saw were fathers, sons, grandfathers, wives, and even the dispatchers were wives and fiancés and so forth in the department, in the police department as well as the fire department. And I saw a lot of military people on the police force. That wasn't a prerequisite for them to be a police officer, but what I saw were individuals from different states and different communities coming into a predominantly Black city on the outskirts of Chicago. And once they placed that uniform on, that gave them a sense of power where they felt that they were more superior than the people within the communities. So is nepotism considered?
Thank you so much. Yes, next question.
so many I have to prioritize one. So I'll ask the one, that I think will have an impact so that everybody can win in a sense, and that'll be to you, Chief. So you talked about trust, and I agree with that 100%. And that is something that you're going to have to dig deep to get to. You recognize that. All right. So what is the conversation that allows people to trust one another? That's the conversation that's going to make a difference on both sides of the fence.
That's right.
All
That's
right.
the conversation that facilitates the trust. Yes.
My question is your procedures for officers that have incidents. What do you do for maybe suspending, having them take a, if you have that 10-day rule? When they have incidents, do you have them sit behind a desk? Do you go through procedures in not having them back on the streets? Because if they're having incidents and they're still on the streets, they're going to have more incidents.
Okay, thank you. What's the procedure? Let's get this question here. Let's make these the last 3 questions here.
To amend the lady's question about the right for an officer to shoot to kill a disarmed person, I wanted to know if it's true that an officer is trained to kill versus like disarming. We've seen time and time again where, you know, someone will get shot 6 times and unload a case instead of just getting shot in the leg or the arm to disable them. And I've been told in social conversations that an officer is trained to shoot to kill versus to disarm. So I just want to know if that's true.
Ma'am? Yes.
Yes, just a short statement, and it's kind of tied into what the lady said regarding what the lady said about being pulled over and when to stop. I was pulled over because I had a brake light out. And when I did not stop and block the entrance to a shopping center, I was given a warning by the police, failure to drive to the curb upon signal by police. But on the back of it, it also says what the police want you to do. And it says, when signaled by the police officer to stop, look for the nearest, safest place to position your vehicle to position your vehicle out of the traffic lane and never stop in the traffic lane.
Yes.
Are they appropriately trained to handle those situations? Because it seems to me that a lot of these people have problems and issues that the police just shoot for no reason. I mean, they should be better trained to handle situations like that.
So training around folks with mental health issues.
Yeah, and people who are just intoxicated or is on drugs.
Well, I want to thank all of you for those questions, certainly for those online who are tweeting as well. I want to get this final, I want to get our panelists to make one final brief 1-minute, 60-second comment. You've heard the questions that were raised. Perhaps you want to respond to one of those questions that were raised. I'm sure the panelists will be around for a few moments. Let's start on this end and then come on down and let Vince Canales wrap things up. Reverend Yeary, a closing comment.
I can't wait for this one. This is good. Thank you, Pastor Coates, for convening this again. A couple of things. One, to the question about relationship building, the best way to build relationship is to get out of the car. You cannot protect and serve people that you are afraid of, and the reason you're afraid of them is because you don't know them. So you got to get out of the car. That's one of the biggest issues that we see around enforcement. If there is an issue around reporting incidents, this has come out of conversations we've had with representatives from the U.S. Department of Justice. If you feel uncomfortable making a report about an encounter you have with a law enforcement officer to the department, you can make that notification to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. So keep that available in your toolkit just in case you need to use it. Mental health teams is the new thing. Ask your department that they go through some sort of training from your jurisdiction's mental health organization. I am the vice chair of the board of Behavioral Health Systems Baltimore, which is the city's behavioral health entity. And we're now working with law enforcement to make sure that they go through mental health training, have mental health teams, have mental health support teams available to them as they encounter, to the young lady's question, that was the last point that she made. And so to the young brother about how you stay informed, you have a smartphone. There are websites that will send you updates, keep you informed. They're usually pretty good. I can give you a number of them. See me after we spend this time together. I think that's a great question because you actually hold the key to repairing a relationship that has been damaged for far too long. Thank you for allowing me to share tonight.
Mr. Acosta, Carlos Acosta.
What I want to do is respond to the question about how do we rebuild trust, how do we start that conversation? And I will tell you, and that really keys right off of what the Reverend said. I'm not exactly sure how you start the conversation, but I'll say this. You don't trust people you don't know. None of us trust people we don't know. So it's incumbent on the police department to get out of their car. It's incumbent upon the police officers to go to the community to meet people. But it's also incumbent on us as citizens to reach our hand out. We have to know them. They have to know us. Then we can decide whether we trust each other. But that won't happen until we get out of our car and we go to the meeting. So I will tell you, the district commander for District 5, Ray Gordon, if you'd raise your hand, is right here. He is very, very good at trying to build those. He can't come up with all the ideas on his own. I'm going to tell you right now, you can contact him anytime, and he will send officers to whatever you need, whether it be a school function, a church function, a civic function, a neighborhood function. He will invite you to his coffee club meetings. We can't trust each other until we know each other. We both have to take a step towards each other.
Thank you. Senator Ramirez.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I have to say that I think our voices are being heard. It's not your voices, it's our voices. And as representatives, we represent you. You vote for us. You entrust us that we're going to do the right thing when there aren't cameras, when we're talking to our colleagues. Just now, I think they announced the other day that we're going to create a commission that's made up of House of Delegates and state senators to look and go talk to the public. There's going to be public hearings that are going to start next month. I wanted to welcome all of you, and I want to invite you to participate in that, in those public hearings that are going to be held throughout the state of Maryland. And I mentioned one legislation, and that's the body cameras. Is that the silver bullet? No, it's not. It's the trust, and I think people hit the nail on the head. We have to trust law enforcement, and law enforcement has to trust us. That we can't coexist like that. We can't live without law enforcement, and law enforcement can't live without us. But until that trust is established, then things such as the body camera must and should be worn. So I thank you all for coming out, and I look forward to fighting for you in Annapolis. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sarah?
Thank you, Pastor Coates, and thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. I want to answer those questions of people who asked how they can stay informed and be involved. And I want to encourage you, as was said earlier, to reach out to your legislators. It matters. Your voice matters. Everything that we're talking about is something they should care about. So email, text, call, reach out to us, to other organizations, but most importantly, reach out to your legislators. There are lots of ways you can find out what they're doing. As Reverend Neary mentioned, there are websites and lots of tools that you can use, but make your voice heard because it's valuable and it does make a difference. So thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you so much. Reverend Herring, our final.
I find it interesting that we end up where I started. And in that, how do we turn this into something that has impact, so we're not here again? So some specific, tangible things at the local level. One, crime control plans where the community and law enforcement come together, putting out a 10-year plan, engage, this is what we're going to do as a whole community. It's measurable. In addition to that, something called early warning systems, where organizations within police department organizations can track issues with officers and determine if there are issues to address. Citizen complaint tracking systems there as well is something that you make it much more formal. And the problem-solving kits that show and teach officers how to engage with the community and the community how to engage with the police around specific issues. But they have to be measurable and they have to be mandated with individuals, the citizen and the police coming together. Beyond the rhetoric is what I like to say.
Thank you so much, Reverend Herring. Wendell Gordon, J. Wendell Gordon.
Thank you. And I forgot, well, I was remiss in not saying that I really appreciate you inviting me here. And again, I'm chairman of the National Bar Association's Rapid Response Legal Team, and we also provide Know Your Rights training. What I want to say is that I want to solicit all of yours help to repeal the 10-day rule for the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. Again, it doesn't take 10 days to tell the truth. It often takes 10 days to come up with a concocted story, but not to tell the truth. Okay, so that's my charge to you, ladies and gentlemen, to get involved in this process. I mean, the person who has a lot of influence over this bill passing or failing is right here from Prince George's County. He may even represent your district where you live or a contiguous district to where you live. Joseph Valerio, write him, call him, email him, and tell him this is critical. This is of paramount importance to you and you want it. Best practices for the young people. I'm talking to the young people. Not everybody grew up with Officer Friendly. Officer Friendly doesn't really exist today. And I know it's probably contrary to everything you're going to hear up here, but I'm that guy. I'm that guy you point to say, Jay Wendell said it. I had Officer Friendly when I was growing up, but what I'm seeing these officers doing to these kids in Prince George's County and Baltimore is really terrible. So best practices, again, these cell phones, use them. If you're in a car, the blue lights come on, that's when you pull it out. You don't pull it out when the car is stopped because police officers, they're scared anyway, so they get a little itchy. So you use them when the blue lights come on. Put it on, turn it on, practice it at home so you can use it fluently. If you're on the street, officer wants to talk to you. Nowadays, I'm telling you, it's just so bad. I'm a defense attorney, so you have to bear with me. You call the police officer because you have a son with a mental illness, the police come and kill him. Okay? We've heard of these cases. This isn't anything unusual. So you find yourself, you're scared of the cops and the robbers. You're scared to walk down the street because you live in a poor neighborhood, and you're scared to run down the street because you're scared you're going to be shot by a police officer. These things have to change. And these are very serious issues that, a lot of police officers can't even relate to because they don't do it. It is that handful of officers who are menacing our community, who are harassing us, who are abusing us, and who are treating us badly. So, and because we can't distinguish between the two when we're in these impoverished communities, I mean, they're probably easier to distinguish out here outside the Beltway. But in all the heights, the District Heights, the Forest Heights, the Capitol Heights, the Landover, the Seat Pleasant, okay, all the heights inside the Beltway, that's where the issues really are. And those are the ones so it may not be as much concern to you out here in Clinton because you're outside the Beltway, but inside the Beltway, it's a lot of havoc being wreaked out there. So pull your phones out. You're not obligated. You cannot be compelled to speak to police officers, young people and older people. You cannot be compelled to speak to them. And quite frankly, you never know where they're coming from. They might be focused on you, and all you need to tell them is that you were down the street at the 7-Eleven, and that's enough of a probable cause to have you arrested. You don't know where they're coming from. And they're not really going to tell you, young people, African-American males like myself. Those are the people who I'm talking to. Us with the silver hair, maybe not so much. Us with the gray beards and our matrons, maybe not so much. I'm talking about my young people. who are out here trying to get it together and trying to find themselves. Those are the ones who need to hear what's coming, what I'm saying out of my mouth tonight. And so I'm hoping that because we're streaming live, they get this message. These phones will save you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks, Virginia Gordon. Vince Canales.
All right, I'll take the next 30 minutes to basically. No.
I'll turn you
What I'm going to do is ask a favor, and I don't know what the response is going to wind up being in here. How many of you actually know a policeman? And when I say know them, they live next to you, they're family members, they're friends. The conversations need to start, should have been starting a long time ago. We don't have to wait till an incident occurs to start having those conversations. And the reality of the matter is based on the show of hands, the majority of you in here don't have to be fearful of that conversation. That individual is no threat to you. The woman that was standing up here who was noticeably upset, that shouldn't be. So we need to start having these conversations a lot sooner. And the reality of the matter is contrary to my brother's belief right here next to me, and we'll just agree to disagree, the majority of the officers out here that you have, not only working in Prince George's County, but working throughout the state of Maryland, are doing a great job, and they're trying to do the best they can with the resources they have available. I can make a million excuses for you for not enough policemen on the street, too many calls for service, not enough equipment. We can go on and on and on. In some situations, these officers are just running call to call. They don't even have the ability to stop and have a conversation with you because someone else needs them on another call. When you're talking to these men and women that are out there, we shouldn't have to wait to have these conversations when things get tense. These conversations need to be occurring now. You know officers, you have family members who are officers, you need to be speaking with them when this meeting is over, and we need to keep this conversation going. I make a commitment to you on behalf of the 22,000 law enforcement officers that I support, that I represent, and that's that we will be at that table. We will always be at that table. You need us, we're there. I thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to be here with you today, and I look forward to conversations down the road. Thank you.
Let's give it up for our panel. I want to thank all of you. Let's give it up to yourselves for being here. Those who are watching online as well. This is a very important conversation. I want to thank our panelists. These are some of the key players who will be a part of addressing these issues statewide. I hope this is not the end, but just the beginning of an ongoing conversation. Because if we are not intentional about this, I fear that we could have another eruption down the road. We have to covenant together as leaders. We have to covenant together as a community to prioritize this issue, and I believe that the conversation will turn into constructive change. I want to thank those who are watching us online. Certainly want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday night. Make sure you stop outside, get the brochure of the classes and the opportunities that we have available. I do want to thank Lieutenant Keisha Powell, who was with us tonight. She was with us tonight. I want to thank you so much for coming, and we regret we couldn't get you on. All right? If there's nothing else, you all be blessed. Go in peace. Feel free to come down and ask questions of our panelists tonight. Thanks a lot.
I appreciate it.